Greg Wrubell joins us now for our Media Day recap of awesomeness, the radio voice of the Cougars. Greg, what was your favorite moment from Media Day?
I was happy to see James die again.
Man.
Haven't seen James in a long time.
He used to be a sideline reporter for us.
Yeah, he was one of our first sideline guys. When I was early in the play-by-play gig, he was number 2 or number 3 of our sideline reporters. We had him for a couple seasons and hadn't seen him in years. And of course, with Trey in town, and he being with Trey and getting him here, to campus and hanging around and being there yesterday, it was fun to see James again.
He's such an eloquent speaker, and I like how
he's smooth.
Oh man, absolutely. That's a great word for him.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed the fact that he was here because he represents, I guess, for our age in the 30s, he was kind of the guy, in 96, the most exciting player. Has there been who else has been as exciting as James Dye to you, historically in BYU football?
Oh man, in terms of pure playmaking ability, he's unique in terms of what he could do in the return game. Austin Collie, people remember him just as a great. He was a great returner as well. He was with the ball in his hand, special things could happen, and so I kind of the more recent vintage players, I look at Austin Collie as one of the most special players to play at BYU in terms of just what can happen when he gets his hands on the ball. And again, people sometimes overlook the fact that he left a year early. Had he stayed another year, I don't think even Cody Hoffman could have touched his records.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned at the start of your show having Dennis Pitta in yesterday, and we got to talk to Dennis as well. And he is just a great story for what he's been through over the last year. I mean, it was less than a year ago that he has that dislocation, hip fracture.
A horrific
And again,
injury.
those can be career enders. His head coach, John Harbaugh, said it's certainly a season ender. And this was going into a contract year. It was a bad news break for Dennis Pitta. But he comes back, and the fact that he's able to get back on the field and then contribute for the final 4 games gets him that big money reward that he really earned. And I think a lot of people thought, oh, this is too bad for Dennis because he's going to miss the year, and the big payday is not going to come. This was his contract year, a chance to really capitalize on his talents, but he's not going to get that chance. And the Ravens are probably going to cut him, and who knows who's going to pick him up. And that's what he was facing. And then beyond that, the potential career-ending ramifications of that injury. But he fights his way back. Ravens get him back on the roster. He contributes. And as I mentioned with Dennis yesterday, the NFL, which is seen as such a cutthroat, what have you done for me lately business, they looked at Dennis and said, we honor, respect, admire what you just went through to get back on the field for us, and we will reward you, and they did. So he's a great story, and again, just a great dude, and just such a cool guy. And BYU's got so many of those guys that come back around every year at this time, and it's so good to be able to chat with them.
Now he's going to build a chapel with that tithing money from that.
The one and only Greg Wrubell on BYU Sports Nation. I thought that yesterday's Media Day was really telling in that there were so many issues that the coaches had to address that hadn't been officially addressed. And I thought Tom and Bronco gave us the clarification that at least I was hoping for. I felt like they answered the tough questions well, and I felt like that was good enough for me. What did you think about them handling the questions that really nobody wants to answer in terms of the Big 12 and independence, and is it working, and the allegations?
Well, as opposed to last year, in which when Media Day was used to launch, probably I'd say 3 rather substantial news notes. You had a bowl deal, you had a USC scheduling arrangement, you had a Bronco contract extension. Those all came out last year at Media Day. This year there was no internal news made. Rather, it was the reaction to maybe some external forces. Mm-hmm. The discussion regarding Big 12 and independence, and part of that was Bronco, kind of lighting the match himself, and he acknowledged that. And the other, of course, was the fact that BYU had this internal review going. This was the first chance to officially address it, and they did. And, again, I think to everyone's satisfaction. He stated the facts, review's complete. NCAA is looking at it. We're looking at a time frame of 2 weeks to a month. Should hear back. Should be minor, not major, and we carry on. And again, BYU is not the only school to be self-reporting. This happens all over the place, and BYU's done it before without us even knowing. And so, again, that's another point to mention is BYU's had contact with the NCAA over issues in the past that we never knew about and just don't know about. And that happens with every school. This one was made known And so BYU reacted to it. But this is nothing out of the ordinary. And if Tom is correct, and it's minor, not major, this shouldn't be anything with lasting repercussions. Relative to independence and the path BYU's on right now, I think that Bronco felt, and this was I think something personal on his part. This wasn't a directive. It wasn't a mandate. It wasn't a strategy from Kevin Wortham to Tom Holmoe to Bronco to say, here comes the assault on the media. Here comes our campaign.
Here we come. Yeah.
This was Bronco taking an opportunity to share some thoughts and feelings that came from his heart about what he believes about his program's value. And I don't think anybody should think he did anything other than state what he believes to be the obvious. We as a program, meaning BYU, have a lot of value for whoever would like us. Big 12, great fit. Absolutely love to be in that as a football program. I mean, BYU's played and beaten Big 12 teams. A lot of reasons for Bronco to believe the things he believes, and that's all he was doing, I think, was stating fact as he sees it. And beyond that, BYU's independence path was in 2010 and is in 2014, in my belief, the best available option.
Yeah. For
Again,
sure.
it's all about what's out there for you. It's not that BYU's turning its is able to just rifle through all these great proposals they have. They don't have those right now. They have their current situation, and those who think that the Mountain West Conference welcoming BYU back is something on the table, it's really not. And Bronco restated that again. This would be going backwards. Okay, it's one thing to maybe not be going as fast forward as you'd like, but you certainly don't want to go backwards, which is what BYU would believe or would judge to be that kind of proposal. Where they are right now was then, is now the best plan that's available to BYU, and they're making the best of it.
They're not going back to the Mountain West Conference.
No. Heck no.
And people think that because it gives you a certain level of access, that is, best group of five gets into the New Year's Bowls. That's that's not all that BYU's after here.
Right.
There's a
if
lot
that
more.
was it, then they would be in the Mountain West.
There's a lot more involved, and again, BYU as an 11-1 in some seasons or 12-0 in this season team would put itself in the discussion with the 13-member committee around that time in December if they're good enough. And that's always been the case. This year, the schedule strength doesn't appear to be there. There's only 3 P5s on the schedule right now, and of those 3, 2 of them combined to go 3-21 last year. So Texas is the marquee game right now. Now, granted, there are of the non-P5s, you're playing some of the best ones out there.
Yes.
Boise State, Houston, Central Florida. So you've got those teams,
I love that
but they would
part.
all have to have really good seasons for BYU to get the kind of SOS strength of schedule heft that you need to be in this the discussion with a loss. I think it has to be a 12-0 year for BYU to really put itself in that discussion. But in many other years, 2013, 15, 16, 17, beyond, there are some schedules that could put them in the discussion with a loss. As long as the right teams win enough of the right games, they're doing the right things right now. I mean, Tom's got games scheduled with P5 teams from now till 2025, I believe. There's a lot of them. There's almost 3 dozen P5 teams on the schedule today, and that's with years to fill out these schedules. So I think when Tom says, they're calling us, that's legit. I mean, BYU's not wanting for games right now, which is another reason, guys, that when people float the notion of schedule alliance, yeah, it could be beneficial if you want to fill that schedule, but that's not the primary need, I don't think, for Tom Holmoe right now or Bronco. It's really a matter of access and inclusion. If this thing gets to a true Tier 1, Tier 2 system, which it appears that maybe heading that way, you want to make sure you're on Tier 1.
Yeah, that's the concern moving forward is, can you be in a position when expansion happens to actually get invited? BYU will be in the conversation when expansion happens in college football. It's just what's the best fit, and it looks like Pac-12, Big 12 are probably the 2 that fit the most. Would you rather be if BYU had the choice, would you rather BYU be in the Pac-12 than the Big 12? I know we've had this kind of like the arrogance of the Pac-12, not an academic research institution. The ideals don't match. I would rather be in the Pac-12 if I had my pick, though.
If the Pac-12 were to act purely pragmatically, they would move to have BYU as part of their group.
Right.
Okay, but they're not. They're not a pragmatic body, clearly. But if they were to be that, they would think geographically and people in seats and media, all these things. BYU makes perfect sense, but it's not just about that. Obviously, clearly, the Big 12, and again, this is kind of an observer from afar, appears to have a little more pragmatic approach, and they may be forced into pragmatism by virtue of the fact that they may need to get to 12.
Yeah.
Okay, the Pac-12 doesn't have any necessary need to expand right now. The Big 12 would seem to have the most need of all the leagues out there for obvious reasons. They would appear to be the most necessarily pragmatic, and that being the case, they've already made they've already created a geographical outlier in West Virginia. This would simply be balancing the scales if they went, to BYU.
From Provo to Morgantown.
I've already spelled out how for 8 of the 9 central Big 12 teams, Provo's closer to them than Morgantown. Okay, but they already did the Morgantown thing, so they already made their outlier, geographical outlier bed. They've got a lie in it now.
They needed Louisville and they didn't get them.
They may want a team to match. To give themselves a pair of Eastern teams that kind of make a little more sense.
Right.
So how does BYU fit into the plan that way? That's something they might have to address. But from a purely, and again, I like to think football only, because I really can't see traipsing every BYU team into all these locations and in the way. To me, the WCC is a much better logistical fit for the other sports, especially at that time of year, travel and everything else. But if you're talking about a football only proposition, and you were saying we'd have to travel to X number of Big 12 schools on an annual basis, no big deal.
Football, it doesn't matter. It's basketball where you're going home and road, and volleyball and all that.
And again, I don't want to speak for Dave Rose or Jeff Judkins, and I use those two sports primarily. There are other sports involved, but the WCC, in my estimation, is a good and viable home for the Olympic sports for the long term.
Yes.
To me, football only becomes a necessarily separate proposition. And I hope it gets explored at least by these conferences that would look to expand. BYU makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons if it ever gets to that.
You would think that it would have to come to that. Like, let's look at all of the options of how we can include BYU in this expansion effort.
Oh, my gosh. Spencer, if you look at it, BYU out in terms of gate attendance, they were better than 8 of the 12 Pac-12 teams last year.
It's
as a football
ridiculous.
program. And that's an annual occurrence.
Wow.
BYU's always going to be would be in the upper third relatively of the Pac-12 in annual attendance. They're by any measure, whether it's TV ratings, whether it's the number of fans they're going to put in seats, by any measure, BYU makes strong fiscal sense for any conference that cared about a football expansion situation.
BYU is a P5 school that is not in a P5 conference.
In every other way except actual membership, and that's and there's no debate about that.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of independence in college football.
That's the frustration for me, I guess. But moving forward, I think, and that's what we learned yesterday, is that BYU is comfortable in their position to launch if the time comes.
Now, they still face significant challenges because the money is pouring in. The money is pouring into the P5 coffers on an every year, click, 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 click. Those big paychecks are coming every single year, and BYU's paycheck's not going to be that big. And BYU's motivations have never been, nor will they ever be, purely fiscal, certainly. But they are being asked to compete with and defeat programs that have the annual paycheck coming in at those huge numbers.
This is risk, and they are Asia, and we are Australia. We only get 2 and they get 7 every time.
Flashback to my 13-year-old self there.
And you're 5.
Okay. So
13.
So BYU is having to actually compete with those programs. Okay, and there's a reality involved there. There's a facilities component. There's a recruiting component. There's the ability to actually beat those teams on the field. But BYU has shown, Texas being a good example, how you can take a program with exponentially greater fiscal ability right now and still beat that team on Saturday or Thursday or Friday.
Dominate them.
Yeah, so that can be done. But at some point, I think you're going to have to address the disparity that continues to grow year by year. And BYU would like to be, again, on the upper tier, whatever that tier looks like. BYU would like to be there when the time comes.
Yeah. Greg Wrubell, radio voice of the Cougars, with us on BYU Sports Nation. Always great to have you on, Greg. The window of opportunity is what you brought up the last time you were here. And BYU has it moving forward. Winning takes care of everything. That's what Bronco said yesterday.
And of all the schedule they've had to compile as an independent, this one would appear to be, and who knows again how these other teams are going to be. I mean, if Boise tears off an undefeated season, and so does Central Florida, and somehow these lesser P5 lights rebound, it could look to be a very strong schedule. But it would appear that it's the most manageable to this point to go out and make some real noise.
Yes.
When you combine it with the actual personnel on the field, this would be the year. As I've said before, it'd be a good year to have a great year because things are set up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks, Greg.